Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 9 of the Future Ready Librarians podcast series, Leading from the Library. This is a podcast for all librarians wherever you are in your journey. It is filled with amazing guests, important topics, and engaging conversations that will inspire, engage, and support all of us as future ready librarians. I am your host, Shannon McClintock Miller. I am the district teacher librarian at Van Meter Community School in Van Meter, Iowa, and serve as the Future Ready Librarians Leader. I have the pleasure of working within my library and school community and also with others around the country and world through the Future Ready Librarian events, conferences, consulting, writing, and more. I am honored to bring these voices and the work of others to our podcast and to all of you. Well, today on our podcast, I am really excited. I have been looking forward to this one because I received a new book in the mail called Prepared Libraries, Empowered Teams, a workbook for navigating intellectual freedom challenges together. And when I saw who the authors were and took a look inside, I knew that we had to have them on our podcast. And so I am very excited to welcome the three authors, Becky, Val, Maegan, to our podcast today. So thanks, ladies, for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to start with Becky. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So my name is Becky Calzada, and I am a district library coordinator in Central Texas. I have been in, I do a lot of advocacy work with the Texas Library Association, and I'm on their legislative committee. I've done some work on the Intellectual Freedom Committee for the American Library Association, and of course, a lot of work with AASL, and I'm currently the AASL president. So crazy.
No, congrats. I love it. Couldn't think of a better voice for us all. So thank you for being on. And next we'll go to Maegan.
Hi, I'm Maegan Heindel. I am a district library coordinator in Southern Wisconsin. And I've also had some involvement in the past with AASL and a lot with our state association called WIMTA. And I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, thank you for joining us. And Valerie.
Thanks. I'm Val Edwards. I was a high school librarian for a number of years and also served as the district librarian for that small school district. And then I also have done some time in a coaching situation for a school district for the library team. I also worked for teachingbooks.net, which is a super fun thing for several years, and involved on both my state professional association and also AASL.
Oh, great. I love teaching books.
Yeah, it's such a great resource for sure.
Shout out to that. We have that in Iowa, and it is so great. So that is a cool little fact. Well, I want to talk today just about preparing to be empowered and challenge ready. And when I picked up this book and we think about all the things that we hear every day, I just listen to the news and there are more things tonight. I can't be more excited for people to be able to have this. And let's just start by having one of you tell us, or all of you, about how this book came to be and why you wrote it.
I think Val should share that story.
So after having left my high school position and then also teaching books several years later, I was doing consulting as a conflict mediator. And when all of these more politically charged challenges started happening, and even historically, I feel like often you see a sole librarian as the face of that trauma in a district or a public library or whatever the situation is. And so along with, and I did have a little bit of experience with this in my tiny district, not much, because for the most part, Wisconsin had not historically had a huge issue. And what happened in that situation was that even internally when that happened, it's such a stressful emotional situation. We had some internal conflict while we were like sort of rallying to address the external conflict. And so I wanted to think about preparing for acknowledging that there are going to be people in different places as you approach these situations ahead of time, so you know what your expectations are, so you're not expecting your colleagues to do something that they're not equipped to do, and having those conversations. So I thought, I want to present about this at ALA, and I need to bring some people like who are spearheading these things along with me on that proposal. And so Megan and I had worked together previously, and she was newly positioned in her district as a leader of the team. And I also, during teaching books, had a chance to just have a sort of like glancing acquaintance with Becky. And I did not know that she was going to be famous and be the ASL president. But it was like, what a happy happenstance to have just like stumbled into. So anyway, I reached out to them, and they were both very gracious about coming on board. And so we did that, and it was at the presentation in 2023 in Chicago that one of the editors, Jamie from ALA Edition, approached us afterward and asked us if we would do a proposal for the book.
Oh, that's great.
One of the things that I think was really unique about the opportunity is, I think, like as Val said, there's been a lot of learning, professional learning around, intellectual freedom and how to prepare for a challenge. And it's been very like single based, like if you're a librarian, you should try to do this or try to do that. And it was a very like singleton sort of preparedness. And what intrigued me about this idea for a presentation and eventually a book was that it was about a team approach. And I think there's not a lot out there about how to prepare as a team. And it's not to say that it's not happening, but there wasn't really anything in print that sort of addressed maybe specific things you could do intentionally, consistently across whether a small school district or a larger school. And I think that was another unique thing about all of us coming together. We're in different places. I'm in a school district that serves over 43,000 students. And then, smaller. And then I think just the different places, Texas having been kind of like an initial hotbed. And then of course we know that it's kind of gone all over the place. So I like the idea. And then when we planned it all, I think, I don't think we expected, the book thing was like so unexpected, but when they presented it, it was definitely something that like, oh, we could do this. We kind of have an outline. We just need to sit and do it. And of course, there's 3 of us. So when you're doing something for the first time, it makes it definitely feel like it's something attainable because you're doing it together.
No, that is so great. Well, and I think about like as we go back to school and as we were sitting kind of getting ready, Megan was talking about how she was with her librarians today doing PD. And so I'm sure that you had these conversations. And I even had a conversation today with some librarians in Long Island. And one of them was brand new. And one thing that I know that you address in your book is that important work that's not in our job description. And that's something that for me, like over the years, and just, it seems like every year we have something new, right? That maybe we didn't know about. And so maybe we could talk about that and just touch on some of those points that is important, but not in our job description, maybe as librarians.
So I think one of the things that we don't really talk a lot about, I mean, we know it's important, but it's like the relationship coalition sort of building, with the stakeholders. And so our stakeholders could be like our students, of course, because we work directly with them and we want to, know what their needs are and, have their input. But when we also think about the community, the parents of those students, the teacher stakeholders, there could be the administrators. And then I think just the community in general. And one of the things that I think, I remember going to school and you talk a little bit about advocacy, but you you might get into the why it's important, but until there's something happening, do you realize the importance of that voice so that they can speak in favor of and to support librarians or the library program, whatever. I think that until you're at that point, you don't realize like, oh, I wish I had done this or I wish I'd share that. And so that's one of those unspoken things I think librarians don't. I mean, we know. Unfortunately, sometimes I still hear of places or people reaching out like they're going to maybe cut our jobs or they're going to do these things, whatever, insert whatever action. And what can I do now? It's heartbreaking to me because I'm going to still help and share what I can, and but I think it's almost too late when you're asking that question. And I know whenever I speak to my librarians, that I work with, or any librarians, every interaction is an opportunity to build a relationship. And whether it's like you're training volunteers or you're just like, welcome to our new school, come see our new library. I think about open houses and maybe, students go to the classroom. What can we do as librarians to strengthen that relationship with parents and encourage them to come into the library to learn about what it is? Because what I know is so many reference their experience when they were younger, and our libraries have evolved so much, even in the 23 years I've been a professional. So if we have a grandparent who was in a library 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that library was very different from the library of today. So I think that's one of those unspoken, like, what can we do to engage our community and build relationships?
Yeah. The other, though, too, Megan, I think you should speak to just the policy learning, because you were in your district when you went into leadership, but I think there were some policy surprises still. And then tying in, Becky, to what you were saying about like those relationships and how learning about policy things, then you often end up having to rely on a lot of other people. And Megan has this is hearsay, so I'll let Megan talk about that.
Yeah. That's been a huge piece, and I've said this in several conversations I've had recently that I did help write this book, but it's still very much a constant process in my district, and I think it's important to remember that it doesn't end. And so just today, even, we were taking a look at our a selection policy one-pager, and we were talking about what's within our locus of control, and saying that we can't at this point in time, changing the policy is not on the docket right now, but we can make sure that we strengthen our procedures and that we know them really well. So we took a look at a selection policy one-pager, and then we did some practicing around answering questions that a parent might have, or even a teacher might have, in ways that, just like Becky was saying, that we actually are building trust and relationship, because that is an opportunity where you can make or break that trust and relationship if you respond in a way where you thank that parent and let them know that you are that you care about their kid and their concerns. Then you're going to build the trust where that person's going to come to you again next time they have a question, and not maybe escalate it to something bigger and wider. So we did some great practicing and some role playing today, and had a lot of thoughtful responses and a lot of good learning today. And every time we do that, we have the opportunity to be more prepared to speak eloquently, to speak calmly, when we do have a question from one of our community members.
Yeah. Can I also say too that I think that while that is so important, because I think the more you do it, the better you get at it too. I think also the other thing that, as librarians and just knowing the schooling we went through in terms of understanding, what our work is in terms of intellectual freedom and all, while, I think we think, oh, we have to fight for it. And there's a lot of context that comes with the word fight for it, right? When you say fight, people think, oh, like, like not necessarily fist fight, but just like we've got to beat the defenders. And while yes, we are, I think there's a way to do it that is reminding whoever's coming to you that your role is about protecting the rights of all students. So recognizing that the parent has a right to decide what their reader gets to read, that it's the imposition of their rights on others, this where the problem is. And so it's a very kind of careful line to walk, because there's a way to, have that conversation. But there's also a quick way to cause defensiveness, and then you're not willing to work. And I think we know that school librarians, just like school teachers, want to be a partner with a parent or whoever's asking the questions. And so I think that's another thing that we don't really talk about. So just kind of thinking about how you can navigate that conversation in a way that's everybody's voice is heard, everybody's respectful. And that sort of thing.
Yes, I saw that defensiveness on the librarian side as well come up in our practice this week. Feeling like, well, kids should be able to read this kind of book. This is important for kids to have access to this. And that is so true. But I also really encourage people to try and take your personal feeling about the book itself out of it and just keep pointing to policy. That is not, policy is not personal, but that's what we select by, it's what we deselect by, and that's what, if there's a reconsideration, that's what we'll go by. And so if we can point to that, it creates less tension, interpersonal tension between you and the person you're talking to.
It's the due process of it all. I think that's the big thing. And just like there's due process for students, teachers, administrators, and that guides how things are done. That's what I try to tell, principals who maybe might get rattled about, maybe somebody reads something to them or whatever. And I was like, I am not negating your personal feelings, but we're not talking about feelings right now. We're talking about what is our process, what our procedure, and then the book itself has its due process and its time. And if it's, we're going to follow and see where things land, and then we'll have a conversation, right? So.
Yeah, I think about too your book, and for those who haven't seen it, tell a little bit about the workbook part of it. Like, how does the book work for a librarian? And I think it's also really important too, because we have people maybe who are new. We might have people in schools who aren't certified librarians. We have administrators who would find this book so important. And so talk a little bit about the importance of that. And I think it's so great that it's a workbook. So I want people to know what that's all about.
Well, it's structured in 3 sections. And so I don't know if we each kind of want to touch on our section. So it's kind of a continuum of an experience, although certainly some people are going to come to that book in the midst of a challenge, or coming at the tail end of it, having had that experience very recently. Some people are going to be looking at, anticipating and hopefully never really needing to apply whatever they learn from it. So it is sort of something that you can dive into whatever section is most relevant to you. If you have the luxury, though, of being able to use it as an anticipatory tool and sort of try to prevent there from being a lot of internal tension along with the stress of an inquiry or challenge. The first section addresses policy and knowing your policy and sharing your policy with the people who need to be informed about that and how it's interpreted and what that means for if something comes in by chance as a laundry list, the superintendent cannot just demand that everything be pulled that day from a library according to policy. And Maegan is very strong and grounded in the policy and wrote that section. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about the workbook piece of it in that area, Maegan.
Yeah, I think one of the things to remember and reiterate kind of like that I don't have control over. I think that people reading this are going to be in all different positions of power. Some people are going to have different team setups. Some might be on their own as a librarian in a district, or maybe someone is a paraprofessional reading this who wants to be prepared. And while we wrote it from the lens of preparing your team, really anybody can think this through. And so when it comes to policy and procedure, do what you are able to do in terms of updating it. But if you can't, then know how that's going to be applied. Play it out. If you haven't had a challenge already, then you can maybe even take something that you're hearing about in the news and apply your policy to it and say, how would this pan out and what might be the tricky points? And can you advocate to a leader for that change? Or can you add procedure and practice that makes that process clearer? Because it could be that the policy itself can't be changed, but those practices that you build on them can be updated more easily and can work in your favor to make things smoother, clearer, less stressful, and more cohesive with your team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So each chapter ends with a segment that sort of chronicles your journey, and that's that workbook component that lets it be tailored to what you need in it. We hope that it's frequent enough so it's not like I've lost the thread of what I was thinking in chapter 3 by the time I get to chapter 5, that type of thing. And the middle section is really about taking that policy knowledge and then finding your people on your team, in your organization, who need to know and be involved, who actually might be the people that an inquiry or a challenge might first come to, who are not the librarian. And I mean, that it could, when people know that someone works in an organization, in a library, I mean, you can be at the coffee shop and you could be a shelving page and get the question in the line. Like that's how it works in a lot of communities. It's like, oh, I know you, and right now I know I'm like irritated about the book my kid's reading in the car. So I'm bringing it up, and I don't care that you're the shelving page. It means nothing to me. You work in the library. So identifying who needs to be, like Megan was saying, having some information and thinking that through, doing those practicing. But then also it's in there, like when, as a team, who is your support and helping with addressing a challenge? And the situation I referred to, we had people who just could not take the risk of being out visibly responding. They couldn't risk that would put their job in jeopardy. Single parents, that type of thing. But they can be the one who calls and gathers all the data on the reviews and how the book is being used and that type of thing. So knowing ahead what those roles are and knowing who you can call on. And even as a solo librarian, it's like, who are my advocates in the community? Who are my public library colleagues? Who are the people at the bookstore? Who's on the parent association that might be, someone who will support me, so that going in how to, rally that support and help contain the stress and emotion of it and be able to process it with someone safe. And then Becky really nicely dives into that last section of the book in terms of building coalition relationships, being intentional about language. And so Becky, let me have you say more about that.
Sure. So, we talk about the capacity building, and, I know Val talked a little bit about that. I think when you step back and think about all the possible entries for who's going to have those conversations, and we tend to focus on the professionals, which is okay, and we need to do that. But what if a parent with a very high emotional in a high emotional state reaches out to the receptionist and says, I have a problem about a book because da 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 da. And the receptionist says, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. And let me give you to the librarian. So we've already on the front line of, saying hello and trying to be welcoming, and affirm the feelings. Is the parent already feels like they've got an ally. The receptionist agrees with me, kind of thing. And while we know that customer service is really important, how can we help our receptionists say, I hear you have a concern. Let me connect you to the librarian or to the principal or whoever your processes, kind of speak to. So I just think that we have to kind of look through the different perspectives of where this comes in. I think also too, if you're a larger school district and you have sort of like a communications team, how can you teach the communications team about what to say and how to say it? If you aren't careful, a communications team might say, oh, we removed those books, not understanding that when you say that, you're going to alienate maybe a side that's not for, or that is in favor of, access and that kind of thing too. To still be able to say, like, we're reviewing our processes and we will return, information. We will get back to those parents. I mean, like, just kind of helping them and coaching people in those conversations. And so there's a lot of that in that final section. Way or communication opportunities that that are going to facilitate good conversation versus like what's going to have that adversarial tone. We actually have a whole page in there that says, here's some things that are going to open up conversation and here are things that are going to shut down conversation. And then we talk, of course, about scenarios, because I think that's been one of the biggest and most important things that we've learned. We're living in a very different time when it comes to book challenges. We know that there's a lot of historical context for book bans. There's history, it's happened in the past, but what's different about this time is it's been a little more longer lasting because we've been dealing with this since 2020 and it is 2024. And then we're seeing a lot of copying and pasting. We are seeing like the building of websites in just a moment, kind of like, oh, here, just replicate. And nobody's wanting, I say nobody, people that have concerns are not reading, so it just looks different. And so because of that, how can we prepare, our professionals? Well, how can we prepare our principals? How can we prepare our school board members even? Because at the beginning, they just didn't know how to navigate this. And so we also talk about the importance of, having a pulse. Like, I like to stay and, see what's happening in the community, but I actually look beyond, because one of the things that we also see is the copycat behavior. So, oh, this happened in Iowa. Next thing you know, it's in Florida, or this is now in, wherever, insert state. So having that awareness, and then maybe even taking some of those scenarios and talking about how you would process them, it just helps you to kind of think through. And I think the even better part is when you share them, you actually go through them, but then turning back and reflecting. What were the strengths of that interaction? What were the opportunities? I don't think we don't need to say what was good and what was bad. It's there are strengths and things we learn, but there's also opportunities for improvement, and what can those be? So we really wanted to be thoughtful about that, because this is hard work, but it's important work. And one of the things we wanted to do was share so that others could learn, but we also know that there's just a massive community of people that are dealing with this too. So how can we continue to share too?
Yeah, I really love the scenarios. And I think about too, as I read the book, even, sitting with the school board or the secretary or my associate, and having those conversation, or substitute teachers who are in your, library, all the people. And so it's really helpful to be able to have those. And I know that people will appreciate it. I think it'd be so interesting to collect books from people who go through this workbook and read it. That would be really interesting thing for you guys to see, right? As people
takeaways.
the takeaways,
Yeah.
and after a year you'll have to like put out a survey or something like that, just collects some of that data and
Yeah.
It's a good
those
idea.
and feelings from people, because I know that they will really appreciate it. But you guys are doing amazing work. And I know that people who are listening, because we have the experts on, they might be saying, like, where can I get additional training or information? And so if you have anything to share before we wrap up our conversation, I would love for you to share that too.
No training. I would say probably look to your associations and your networks. So when we wrote this book, we didn't, yes, we brought our school library expertise into it, but we also really thought about like what it could look like in the public library venue, because we know even though it started with schools, it eventually led into the public libraries, and we're all interconnected. And so I think the same, so we might, the problems are the same, they just look a little different, right? Or maybe there's aspects that are not different. So what the commonality is, like, we're leading into our associations and our organizations, um, our intellectual freedom committees. And so whether it's a state association or maybe it's a national association like ASL or ALA, the Office of Intellectual Freedom. I mean, and there's a lot others. I think about the National Coalition Against Censorship and America. I mean, there's just so many, right? So how can you leverage those people because they want to help? I don't know. What else do you want to add, y'all?
Right. I think that's true. And there's a lot of webinars. And Shannon, even what you had mentioned right at the beginning about, I heard more on the news today, staying attuned to what's happening around the country. And really now, of course, it's starting because we contaminate things around the world. Knowing what's happening, but watching what's working.
Yeah.
So there are places where they are effectively addressing this. And then there's places so honestly, the big message, I think, from our book and from us to everyone is do not feel like you have to be alone. Like,
Yeah.
email Val Edwards, like, please do. And also we have we've written an article, we've received some invitations to present at conferences for associations and that type of thing. So certainly if you're in a situation where that's something where you want to know not just about addressing challenges, because there's so much great information out there about that and people sharing their experiences, but specifically about sort of rallying this internal team in anticipation, reach out to us. We can definitely talk about what opportunities that might present.
And then I just wanted to add a little bit specifically, if you are able to look at your policies or you're trying to strengthen your procedures, that the Office of Intellectual Freedom has a lot of resources for you if you call them, and can give you sample policies. Also, just we can't say it enough, those relationships. I know of several people in Wisconsin who I've spoken with about how they've already strengthened their policies in the face of challenges. And I know that I'm going to be reaching out to those people to ask what's worked and what's not, so that I'm not guessing when it comes time for us to make some official policy updates. So, those relationships are just always going to be at the core of this work.
Yeah.
One of the things I think we can do is, post in the show notes about, a link to the workbook. So if you want to order it, if you're an ALA member, you get a discount. So there's that. But I don't think it's, priced out of anybody's reach. But you can also go look. There's a link for the table of contents. And so you can see what's on there. So you kind of have an idea of what the book is about. Because I know it's hard, when you get a book and you're like, oh, well, what if it's not going to work for me? I think that's one of the nice things about this book is that it's more of a workbook, and whether you want to just read the whole thing or you just know, I just need to get to the scenarios part. Like it's digestible enough, but yet like not overwhelming because it's fairly small. That there's takeaways for anybody that's going to read it.
Yeah, and something that you can keep around even after you read it, because you'll go back to those things and probably write different things or revisit, differently. So that's what I appreciate about it. And I appreciate all of you being on tonight because I know that I have a lot to think about. I've taken so many notes and I think about these things every day. And so I really am grateful, and everyone is, for the work that all of you have done and continue to do. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for
thank
having
you.
us.
And we'll make sure to get in the show notes, just like Becky said, where you can get the workbook and also their information. So if you need to contact them, like you heard, they're open for people to reach out. So I'll make sure everything is in there too. So thank you so much. As always, thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for this episode of the Future Ready Librarians podcast series, Leading from the Library. And a very special thank you to our sponsors, Follett Content. You make a difference in our libraries, schools, and within our lives, and that of our students every day. We appreciate everything you do. I hope you can take what you learned in today's podcast and put it to use within your practice as a future-ready librarian. If I can support you in any way, please feel free to reach out to me on X or Instagram at Shannon M. Miller, or to my email at shannonmcclintockmiller@gmail.com. I am always happy to help. Until next time, friends, keep finding ways to lead within and from your library.